Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Cup Reviews, brought to you by Cup of Hemlock Theatre. I'm your host, marketing manager, and for this episode, your narrator, Mackenzie. And today, we're talking about one of my all-time favorite musicals, one that is very near and dear to my heart. It is Into the Woods by Stephen Sondheim and James Lapine. And the particular production we are discussing is the 2010 Regent Park Open Air Theatre production, starring Hannah Waddingham as the witch. So, to join me on my journey to get the cape as red as blood, the cow as white as milk, the hair as yellow as corn, and the slipper as pure as gold, we have the wonderful Gillian Robinson. So tell us, what is your experience with the woods? What's your favorite song? And what is your ensemble? And what is in your cup?
Correct. So great segue. So I prepared a little something for the ensemble today. Mm-hmm. So here it goes. Mm-hmm. The cardigan is red as blood. The hair is yellow as corn. The ear is pure as gold. The cup as white as milk. So that's the ensemble. And I just have some cinnamon flavored black coffee this morning.
Love it.
Fun little tidbit fact. Into the Woods was my first commercialized musical I was ever in. I played Little Red back when I was 15. So that's another reason why I wanted to wear my red cardigan today. And by far my favorite song is Your Fault, because it is the hardest song probably I will ever have to learn and execute in my career. And it was just such an awesome feeling and success to nail it and connect with the other actors on the stage. I realized watching this production, it's funny how much I remember everyone else's tracks more so than Little Red's, because this musical kind of forces you to do that. So that would be my favorite song and how I kind of was introduced to the woods.
Love that. Joining me also on our journey into the woods is someone who has a ton of experience in the woods. She and I actually connected over our love of this musical and her special connection to it. It is none other than my friend and returning guest, Mariana Galis. Hello, Mariana.
Hi, Mac. Hello, Michelle. Hello, Ryan. It's so nice to meet you both and to see you again. Thanks for having me.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a very sentimental relationship with this show. My mother, Lauren Mitchell, was part of the original Broadway company of Into the Woods. She played Lucinda, one of the stepsisters, and she also covered the baker's wife for a little bit. So she was in the original Broadway company, and then she and the man who's my stepfather, he produced the original production, which is how they met. And so then they together produced the 2002 Broadway revival, which I sort of think is very cute. But yes, I grew up with the Milky White from the original production in my house. The harp, I had Jack's bag of gold around. It didn't seem strange to me until I got older that was sort of an unusual thing to have. So I grew up watching the original recording and going to rehearsals when I was very, very small and interrupting dance calls and different things. And then I played the witch in Into the Woods Junior in my 6th grade production of Into the Woods. So, in there.
Love that. Love that. Oh, and what is your favorite song and what is in your cup?
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I'm still so new.
It's okay.
Favorite song, I Know Things Now. And in my cup is an iced Americano, oat milk, and lavender syrup.
Love that. And also joining us is my friend, my co-producer, our resident dramaturg and literary manager, really the true narrator of Cup of Hemlock, Mr. Ryan Borochovitz. Hello, Ryan.
I don't know why you think I'm the narrator. You're always the one hosting these things. But yes, hello. Hello, man. Hello, everyone. Nice to be here.
Yes. What is your experience with the woods?
Admittedly less than the rest of y'all. So I will be the recipient of a lot of, I guess, clunky exposition in this this review. I saw the movie when it was new, like the 2014 Meryl Streep.
Yes.
2014, I think that's correct.
Yep, 2014.
Aside from that, I've never actually seen a production of this. I'm not like a big musical guy, as people who watched some of our previous musical episodes will know. I enjoy musicals. I enjoyed this, but yeah, certainly don't have the encyclopedic knowledge that someone like Mac brings, or the industry knowledge that Mariana and Jill, you certainly bring here. So yeah, excited to be more of the novice on this one. But
love that. What is in your cup and what is your ensemble today? And did you have a favorite song as a newcomer to the woods?
Yeah, well, I'll start with the favorite song. It's actually so it's in the finale, but not the whole finale, specifically the Children Will Listen segment of it. That gave me the feels. And I think one of the questions we have coming up will allow me to explain why a little more. So I will refrain from getting into details. Okay. I have in the Cup. Hey, the Cup, that's the show we're on right now. Cup of Hemlock Theatre. I have coffee because we're filming this one pretty early in the morning.
We are.
And my shirt, interesting, because like in real life, IRL, it actually looks like the hair of the corn, but under this light on the Zoom window, I feel like it looks more like the milky white of the cow. So take your pick which one it is.
Love that. And I'm also drinking from my official The Cup. It's an Earl Grey tea with some honey, and I'm wearing a green shirt in honor of the woods. So there we go. Oh, and my favorite song is always It Takes Two, because it is the one moment of happiness in this whole show. And if done correctly, it's a perfect relief from the contentious bickering that the baker and his wife have had leading up to that point. And we'll get into whether or not the production hit that mark to make that song extra sweet, or if it kind of fell flat and was just a cute song. So there we go. We'll get into that. But why don't we get into, first of all, which character do we feel was best performed? And Jill, I'll let you start this one.
Awesome. So I kind of have two. I have one that took the cake for me, but then sort of like an honorable mention. So Jenna Russell as our baker's wife was my favorite character. I just think her comedic timing was spot on, and she had such like a calm demeanor and natural approach to the whole piece. And just her maneuvering, sort of being in an outdoor space, and the scaffolding, right? There wasn't a lot of like set to lean back on. She was always taking up space, and her imagination was always seen by the audience, in my opinion. And her arc was really, really well executed, but really just like her comedic timing. I think that's the ticket, similar to what you were saying, Mac, of that song kind of allowing laughter and happiness to flow in to amidst the darkness of the woods.
Yes.
I think that through that character, we can get a lot of light and jolliness. And that definitely came through with her. Yeah, so I would say Jenna Russell is the baker's wife, but then the witch was another honorable mention for me.
Hannah Waddingham.
Hannah Waddingham, yes. Yeah, she just had the grounding and the strength and the ferocious demeanor that the witch calls for. But again, like, I felt bad for her, right? That character to me is always so interesting to sew together, because she's a villain. I wouldn't necessarily say she is the villain, right? The giant kind of comes in and takes on that. But so you just have like a distaste in your mouth with her, but then you kind of feel bad for her, and then her transformation adds another layer to that. So yeah, so I definitely have to shout her out, because I think she executed all those spokes of the witch beautifully.
Yes. I mean, I will say, because I'm going to piggyback, Hannah Waddingham was my favorite of the cast. And I will say, I think she has to be my favorite witch. She gives Bernadette Peters a run for her money. And it's mainly because she got in, like, Brenda Peters is very funny as the witch. Brenda Peters is, once again, she's very snappy and sharp. Like, Brenda Peters really amplifies the humor and the dark wit that character has. What Hannah did as her witch is she really got into the darkness of who this character is, which made her a little bit less sympathetic. But I was okay with that because what she brought was such a more gray character overall. Like, the fact that after she chops off Rapunzel's hair, she says, "Look what you made me do." Like, it just hit because it's like, she just captured the whole concept of the witch is truly, she is the abuser in that relationship. Like, the fact that happens and that's something that has been said to people as a guilt trip in those moments, and the fact that she brought that along, and then in other moments when she's about to lose Rapunzel, there's a heartbreak in her there, and then but once again she's bouncing right back with the fact that she's like hungrily, like almost wolf-like, looking at Rapunzel's twins as well. There's that darker undertow again. Like, she did the ping pong of this character so well that you never quite knew where she was going to land in any particular moment, and I think that's what made her both wonderful and scary to watch, is you never quite knew where she was going to go in any given scene, whether she was going to lash out at you or if she was going to give you a really heartfelt moment as the character. So yeah, truly terrifying. She was wonderful. And I will say, for any of our Game of Thrones fans, Hannah Waddingham is also well known as the evil Septa Unella, who follows Cersei around shouting shame at her. So if she looks familiar, I don't think she will, because they look very different, the two characters. But that is who she is. Once again, just a physical, terrifying presence. And you don't realize how tall she is until she gets into that Act 2 outfit, and you just see just her statuesque quality about her. That's just like, oh wow! Like, even when like you don't have magic, you still have a physical presence that is quite terrifying when you want it to be. So.
It also helps that she's not hunching over with the two canes. It's kind of hard to appreciate her tallness in that posture.
Exactly. Exactly. Mariana, who was your cast shout out?
My cast shout out is actually Mark Hadfield as the baker. There was just something so simple and moving, following his journey. It's interesting. I've only seen the show live really once as sort of a cogent adult person, because I don't really remember seeing it when I was 5, 6, 7. When you're just sort of looking at Cinderella, which is fine. But it's interesting. It's always sort of occurred to me as I've gotten older that most of my experience with the show is watching live recordings recorded. What that does when there's literally a frame following the characters through the woods, as opposed to seeing the entire stage. So the time I saw it live as an adult, I remember sort of thinking, wow, there's so many people in this show. All to say, I found his presence really different in its almost quality, and No More really got me. So.
That song. Yeah. Mark, he's wonderful. I mean, he's very different from like the Chip Zine that I'm used to, and I'm sure you're used to from watching as well. That was a little bit more spunky, a little bit sharper with his verbal barbs. Like, Mark was just like, he played the epitome of the nice guy who gets roped into an unfortunate story in the woods and kind of what befalls him there. Like, he just was just so nice in the fact that, we'll get more into this, but the fact that he plays the real father at the beginning and at the end of the story, there is just something so nice about his whole circle as a character. He just had the epitome of the nice dad nailed down, that is just struggling through the woods. Ryan, who is your cast shout out?
So agree with Jill that Jenna Russell was my number one as the baker's wife, but I have a backup one because Jill and I talked before, and I knew she was also going to pick her, so I'm like, I will come with a second one ready. And it's an unconventional one that nobody's commented on yet, but Mark Goldthorpe as the Princess Steward. I thought he was delightful. He had his really like over the top Kermit the Frog voice.
Mm-hmm.
He was so professional, even when he has to do like terrible things like kill Jack's mother and for the greater good, which, you know, thematically is very important like throughout all of this. But yeah, he just kind of stole every scene he was in for me. And even though he's not in it that much, just at least for me, all eyes went to him anytime he was on stage, and he had some just like great quips and one-liners and lines that I can't even tell if they would be funny in anyone else's voice, but just the way he delivered them were all great. And so, Mark Goldthorpe, the other Mark of this production, gets my shout out there.
He also was a great hen that lays the golden eggs. I did love his bucking when he comes out with the little tricycle chicken. I did enjoy that little cameo he made there as that other character. It was great. Okay. So, Mariana, I'll let you lead this next one because you've seen a number of productions. You've been in the rehearsal room. You've lived with some of the props. So what was your favorite or production or design element of this particular production?
Oh, well, I mean, just how expansive they made this. I mean, I did not expect the giant to appear out of the trees over there, and Rapunzel just being so literally towering over the stage. So, and I read in a lot of the reviews, just sort of, it seems so silly that no one had really, I mean, I'm sure outdoor productions of Into the Woods have been done before, of course, but to take, you know, an iconic park in London or an iconic outdoor theater in London and utilize it in this way, really just the setting and the complexity of the space that they made, which I've never actually been to that theater, so I don't know how much of that was to accommodate the size of the seating or for the viewers or anything like that. But that was just fantastic. I mean, just knowing that they're outside and those are trees and that they're woods is just delights me.
I also had the set as my number one too. I mean, I love the images that were created in this. Like you said, like the fact that Rapunzel's in a bird's nest, like up in a tree. So it's like a total way of depicting that tower. Also, I love the umbrella beanstalk where they took the spiral staircase and just put those green umbrellas out to make the beanstalk. And I was like, oh, that was a cool stage image there with that. But I will say my other shout out in case that was taken was I love the excessive violence in this production. Like they totally went in for the violence with this piece. They didn't shy away. And I was like, good, we're actually matching the original Grimm's fairy tale. But like those stories are extremely violent and dark. And a lot of times productions will kind of hide some of the violence away where they'll kind of brush it off and like not really focus on it. But this production was like, no, you're going to see some violent stuff. Like the fact that when like you see like Rapunzel's prince after he's jumped into the thorn bushes and he comes out with like the things like shooting out of his eyes. It's great. It was like, okay, like that's really terrifying. Or the fact that the stepmother doesn't cut the big toe off, but bites the toe off. And doesn't just in another production where it's just like, oh look, a fake knife. Boom. It's like, no, she's really biting the toe and spits the toe out onto the ground. Was like, oh, like truly gruesome. And just like the fact that we'll get more into this, but the fact that the child's a narrator and the child is murdered on stage just ties into the whole fact that in these stories, a lot of horrible things befall children. Rape, murder, mutilation, like children just get maimed and harmed in these stories. And the fact that this production totally went into that with having the child as a narrator and just having him squished by a giant is just the fact that the directors leaned into the violence of this piece and just brought that. So it didn't do it in a hokey way either. That's what I liked. It wasn't hokey violence. It was actually some disturbing, almost Titus Andronicus like violence, where it's like it's excessive, but it's like, okay, you're making a point that this is what these stories are. This is what lives in a child's head. Children, children are not do know about violence. They're not blind to that. So like they will bring those elements into their imagination. Sometimes when you read a child a story like the prince jumps into the thorn bush, a child's imagination of what will that look like totally will sometimes get over exaggerated and look like twigs coming out of somebody's eyes. But yeah, there's something really great about that violence. So well done. Jill?
Yeah, great segue, because I think the violence kind of plays into my favorite element, because it seemed very 80s to me, how they were showcasing that, like 80s slasher movie, and I loved that was definitely a lens with this production, and we get that through little hints of the boy, right? He comes in with his Spider-Man lunchbox. When he's play acting with the actors behind him, he has a troll, he has a Barbie doll, he has the G.I. Joe. And then that is sort of plastered on top of the characters behind him. And because my favorite design element was the costuming, because I really think it played into that. As you can see behind Mac's head right now, Jack's mother has like the tool belt. So like she's like working mom in the 80s, or and then you have like the stepsisters have their plaid pantsuits. The princes had their sort of Ozzy Osbourne-esque coiffs, right? And
Very
then you
wolf-like.
you have Rapunzel when she's at her shambliest. She looks like Cyndi Lauper, arguably, right? And our Cinderella had like a nose ring, and like the braids down the front, in the very 80s. So to me, that was wonderful because it added a physicality. Another layer of physicality into our narrator's brain, because like I was already thinking, oh, this is cool, he's acting this out, and the production of Into the Woods is just an extension of his imagination. And then because sort of like the 80s flair was shown in the characters we know's costumes, it made me also start to think, oh, are some of these, is the boy imagining some of the characters in Into the Woods as people in his life? Does he know someone who is like a Cinderella? Has he come into contact, right? Like, does he worship the like 80s hair bands, or, you know? And it was just, it was really cool. It was very subtle. So I guess it was kind of like props and costumes doing a little like bit behind to kind of string that through.
Yeah.
Because I think it's something that you don't necessarily have to buy into, right? It is just like an aesthetic that I just like loved. The dramaturgical nerdy side of my brain was like, ooh, what does it now mean to go like 80s on this? And the double meaning of him play acting and then things happening in the background. But it wasn't like, I could still just watch the production as like a first production of Into the Woods and just and still get the content of what Sondheim and Lapine were doing. But yeah, so costumes and props for the 80s little
aesthetic
dash of sugar. Yeah, loved it.
Love that. Ryan, what are you going to go for?
So it's similar, Mac, to what you were saying with the stage images, like the beanstalk, like all that stuff. But I want to specifically single out the puppetry because, Milky White and the hen and the giant, those are like the three most potent images in my mind. And what do they all have in common? They're all puppets of one kind or another. And like they certainly, to me, gave very Warhorse like handspring vibes, which I'm a sucker for. And I don't even have a lot more to say about it. They're just so animated. They really came to life. I like that you could see the puppeteer at all times. They were never like trying to hide, and that almost just made it more powerful and more interesting. Like how we just said that the same actor playing the steward played the hen who laid the golden egg. And we see him clucking around, and it's funny, and it's not. I think puppetry often goes wrong when you make too much of an effort to try to fool the audience, but nobody's gonna think, wow, they got a real cow on stage. It's obviously a puppet. So and I like this kind of interesting handmade aesthetic of the puppets that kind of fits into what Jill was describing about this child's imagination of what these things look like. So that's my shout out.
Love that. All right. Ryan, actually back to you for the next question, which is, what was the weakest part of the production for you?
I was hoping we wouldn't start with me for this one.
You guys gotta tell me when you guys don't want to start a certain question, because I'll know not to go to you. If you don't tell me, I can't know.
So I don't have a good answer for this one. And because certainly in this room, I'm the least familiar with this show. I don't know if the thing that I'm gonna shout out here is actually a problem with this production so much, or if it's actually just something about the musical itself that you're all gonna think I'm sacrilege for saying.
All right.
Like, no disrespect to Mr. Sondheim, but I find the opening number, our prologue, too much is rushed through in that, like...
Sacrilegious!
I know.
Get out!
And again, I don't know, maybe a lot of it, because I haven't seen a lot of productions of this, maybe this one was just sort of not the best paced in like the singing and the orchestration and whatever. I can't really judge that, and maybe if others want to chime in and correct me, feel free to. But
sorry, so your problem with it was there was too much exposition?
So it's more just that it feels there is a lot of exposition to cover, and it feels very rushed through in the opening number. So as soon as that whole Into the Woods prologue ends, I'm just sitting there whirlwind, like, what is even happening? We've been introduced to like 15,000 characters. And there's a really simple setup to this story. It's that the baker and his wife have been cursed, and they need to get these 4 things, and they'll meet these other characters along the way. And then once the story started unfolding, I got that very easily. So I'm like, what was the point of that big whirlwind trying to like catch us up on everyone's deals? Like, and I get that certainly with musicals that there is the setting up everyone's motifs and like the getting the story like underway in that way.
That's what you need to do.
Again, I'm not the biggest musical person, but I think that could have been handled more economically. And again, probably isn't this a production specific thing here. But yeah, it just seems needlessly complicated as our entrance into this world, or what is ultimately a pretty simple story that then becomes pretty clear as you're going. I don't know. That's just me.
Jill, do you want to respond?
All of us
first.
I just think, I mean, and this might just be putting a take on it, but I think it does. One of the beautiful things about this piece is, well, first it's Sondheim, and everyone knows, like, Sondheim will throw you in the ringer, like, from a technical musical point of view. Like, it is a marathon, and you got to be on your shit for Sondheim. And the thing I like about him doing this musical, and where it's so many different micro stories, right, plastered on this macro lens, and taking a risk by connecting them maybe in ways that they've never been connected before. The beautiful thing that the music and something like that number does for me, Ryan, is like, it does create such a chaos that, but you know that it's like organized or like beaded out
controlled chaos.
Right. But like, and as the performer, you know what you're doing, but like, true, as the audience member, like, you gotta be quick, like, you gotta, so in a way, to me, it's like introducing, like, this is not gonna be your beginning, middle, end usual musical. Like, there will be twists and turns, and there will be things that are gonna make you think or are gonna keep you on your toes. And I think to kind of support that chaos and almost like you're saying, Ryan, like unnecessary like load of exposition in a snap, is at the act 2 when things start to unravel and the pace does start to become a bit more molassesy. It's that stark like contrast, like you're kind of halted, and it really is, it does pivot, right? It's like, oh my goodness, the steward just killed Jack's mother. Okay, great. This has now become like a Game of Thrones thing where you're like, I can't put my trust in any of these characters because they may die in any moment. Like, so that's like a roundabout way of saying, like, yes, keep the wiliness, keep the sort of speed at the front, because I think it contrasts beautifully.
Well, and I'm not even against the speed of all of Act 1, which does move at a pretty brisk pace, and it's just specifically the opening number. And maybe it was, I think, it might have more to do with this production than the play as a whole. I just think, yeah, it does feel like, you say controlled chaos, to me, maybe it's controlled from the actor's perspective. It did not look controlled watching it. And
I think it's the production.
That's why I bring it up in this weakest element of the production for me, like, because I don't think it's a ding on the musical itself, but to this production, it felt a little uncontrolled for my taste.
I think it's the production that's doing it, because just because, like, if you watch the 89 PBS version, and the fact that this way that stage was up, where it was just 3 tableaus that are all pausing, starting, you can follow that a lot easier than the way they kind of reblocked it in all these different levels and different weird things happening in different spaces. And the way it was shot was very uncohesive.
Right.
When you watch it on stage, in particular, you get a very clear, cohesive flow to the piece, where like everything kind of bleeds into one another. Like it doesn't feel so herky-jerky. So I do get where you're coming from. With this production, was a very herky-jerky. Which, I mean, even in the film version, the 2014 film, that was very good at adapting that. I think that's probably one of the best parts of the whole damn movie is just that opening number, because it is such a cinematic number that if you don't cut it right, it can come across as chaotic, herky-jerky, versus what Sondheim intended, which was this really kind of flowing piece where one story kind of picks up and then another one kind of moves it along, and then you kind of cut back to the story again. So yeah, Mariana, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, very similar to what you were just saying. That I wonder if it, even though I have questions about what framing does to this show, I do think framing in that opening. And so when you are able to see everyone at once, and there, I wonder if part of it too was a lot of the ensemble was doing movement and dance behind at the same time. And so you have, in addition to Jack and his mother, Cinderella, and the baker and his wife, everyone else is on stage as well, which was, which I imagine in the theater was fantastic. Yeah. Maybe when it's being filmed, it's like if you've ever watched, a broadcast of an opera, it's just sort of, there's so many people and there's so much going on. Well, because it's for an auditorium of 4,000 people. And so, I don't know how many, again, I don't know how many people can fit into Regent's Park, but I imagine the effect live.
Yeah, I'm sure. And it's just the consequence of the way we are engaging with it here. But I did find it was a bit of an obstacle to my entrance into the woods, which is a shame, because that should be the part that really sucks you in.
It should. It should. Jill, what are your thoughts? What is your weakest production or design element?
I kind of started with the same vibe as Ryan of like, I don't really know. But now that we're talking, an idea was kind of flushed out. So, and it kind of has to do with this production and how we're talking about through a lens and how it might have been different in person. With the production I was in Into the Woods, we didn't have like external ensemble. We just had the cast of characters. So like, even in the ensemble-y, like choral bits, we were the ones singing the repetitive, like, into the woods, like, and all of, and those, it's hard to kind of glean by just watching the production once, but every time that pattern comes back, it's changed. Like, it's different words. So, as the actor, again, it's another thing of like, thanks so much, composers, for keeping our brains spry throughout, because the words are now changing, but the melody is exactly the same. And it was neat. Right. It was neat when in the production that I was in, where it was just us doing it. So one thing that was easy was like, I knew I was singing those bits as Little Red. So something like actor-wise, that was easier for me to get the right lyrics, because I'm also terrible with lyrics in real life. I would like tag on what each lyric would mean to Red. And the one thing that I found was kind of what Ryan is kind of saying is in those repetitive bits in this production, it was hard for me, and maybe this is just because I've had the experience of what I just described, but it was hard for me to see extra bodies on stage go through the same journey, because we're not seeing their journey through the woods. We're just kind of seeing them on stage for this like bigger number. And I was like, why are you saying to Granny's house? Or why are you saying, whereas like scoping it down to the like Jack and Red and Cinderella and everything saying these things, I can be like, oh, right, because you're all on the journey into the woods and you're all intertwined, so you could talk about that. So I guess it just kind of took me out in these bigger numbers with like added chorus members. I was just confused sometimes of like, we don't really need them, or like I would just be curious to be like, why do we have this like extra perspective? And again, I haven't seen, aside from the movie and this production, I haven't seen any other production. So I would be interested to see if it's normal to have like a bulk of ensemble to kind of come into those, or if there's other versions where they do just keep like the leading or like the stock characters singing those pieces. But yeah, so in a nutshell, I was taken out a little bit in the chorus members because I was like, why do we need these extra bodies on stage?
Yeah. All right. Well, Mariana, since you have quite a bit of experience with different productions and different things like that, what are your thoughts? What did you think didn't quite work, or do you think it was a pretty solid show overall?
Well, I was thinking about this question when you sent us the questions ahead of time, because I'm sort of thinking. I wonder. I'm thinking about Sondheim musicals, and if there's any way of sort of thinking about them in terms of opera. And I'm going to use a lot of, it's not going to be a perfect fit, and I apologize in advance for like actual opera people and actual musical theater people. I'm sorry. But something that in the little experience I have learning about opera, the thing is, right, there's no platonic ideal production that exists necessarily. Like the score is the score, and then you can have a lot of different productions arising out of that score with those characters needing certain things and a story being told, right? And so all of a sudden I was sort of thinking, okay, well, what happens when you put Into the Woods in a big outdoor theater? Like, what are the demands of that production of Into the Woods? Because I might have my own, I obviously am very touchy-feely about the original, and so it's sometimes hard for me to be very objective when watching other productions. But so I'm just sort of thinking, okay, they needed to do it outside, so probably it's going to be bigger and have more people than a production in a theater where all of those people would just be too overwhelming. Okay, great. So that, I'm sure, live worked beautifully. I don't know all that much about Regent's Park, but maybe it was more of a family show. And so maybe some of the choreography and the movement in those fun costumes, besides the point that you made, Jill, about it being out of the boy's head, like they're eye-catching, they're eye-popping, they're fun. So I'm thinking, okay, great. If we want to make all of these characters emerge from this boy's imagination, then I see how it all fits together. So I guess I'm sort of thinking why I go back to opera is, if there's no like perfect Into the Woods that exists and in the ether that we're trying to strive for, and this production had a certain set of ideas and needs, then I think, yeah, it had a vision and it absolutely saw it through, even if maybe for me, like I do have questions about, okay, well, if mostly I just sort of have, Mac knows, I always have more questions than answers.
Love it.
Really annoying.
I love it.
Me. But so I might wonder, okay, well, if it's going to be out of the boy's imagination, then do these characters have integrity as characters? Because even if he, because once the child is eaten by the giant or dropped by the giant in his nightmare, then what do we make of everything that happens between him being eaten and waking up? It's sort of just a question I have. But in terms of, they had an idea, we're going to make the narrator a boy and it's going to be from his mind, and we're going to do it outside in this huge space, and maybe make the theme, the home base for this production is about Children Will Listen. I think they had a plan and they executed it to the fullest logical extent, is sort of what I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think out of all the Sondheim canon, and it's a big ass canon of, the fact that this is volume 2 of his work, like full of stuff that he does. I think this is his most malleable musical, where because it's a fairy tale, it can be reimagined so many ways. Like I know when Stratford did it a number of years ago, directed by Peter Hinton, they did it where it was set in Canada. So Act 1 was Canada in the fall, and then Act 2 was Canada in the winter. And like the witch, she like her staff was actually a giant asparagus stalk, and she was covered in vegetables. It was Susan Gilmore. I wish I had seen this show. It looks so cool. I mean, Bruce Stowe, if you look up a picture of him, like in Act 2, he's literally all white from head to toe, as if he's been caught in a giant snowstorm. It looks like one of the Group of Seven paintings is basically what they did. It looked really cool. So yeah, I do think that this musical is most open to reimaginations, reinterpretations of just how does a fairy tale look. I mean, versus like a production like Follies, which is a very particular time and place, and you don't have much choice of what you can do with it. This, like, once again, your imagination can just explode. But once again, dramaturgical due diligence is required. Don't just willy-nilly it like, oh, it's a fairy tale, I can do anything. It's like, no. There still has to be some dramaturgical work done here to keep your concept cohesive. Which actually ties into what my weakest element was, which was the direction of this piece by Timothy Sheader and Michael Steele. It was an uneven direction, in my opinion. Some elements of the show really hit their mark, and then other elements did not. So some casting choices were really brilliant, like Hannah Waddingham as the witch, Jenna Russell as the baker's wife. The fact you get Judi Dench to record as the giantess and actually give us a very sympathetic giantess where like her last lines of "thank you, now I can go in peace." And the fact that then you go and kill her, it's like, oh, like she wasn't so villainous after all. Judi Dench brought the point that the giantess has a motive that isn't totally wrong. So that was great. But then other cast choices like Beverly Reddit's Little Red. She was just too old for the part. I unfortunately I can't get Daniela Ferland from the 89 version. And she was 18 when she recorded, but she was 16 when she started that role. So she was in the perfect age. Jill, you were the right age for Little Red at 15, where like Little Red should be someone who is just on the cusp of adulthood, who is discovering these like new adult emotions, sexual feelings, things like that. Like there is an undertow of that character when you have somebody who's clearly in their 20s trying to play childlike. It just didn't quite work. So like that was a miss. And then like other things was like the costumes, like the witch's costume with the stick arms and the mask work that was done. And then like the Act 2 just green gown that she wears. Stunning. But then like the Cinderella and Prince look, I just was not having that. Like, I'm sorry, Cinderella with the face piercing is just, and dreadlocks. I was like, no. I mean, you can do that if you want that to be her traditional non-ball look, and then have her change into a ball princess look, idyllic princess look, and then have her change back, which gives him more reason why the prince wouldn't recognize her, which just goes to show he really is very superficial that he does this with her. So like the fact that and the princes, like they just were a little bit too steampunky for my princely cup of tea. And then like other certain directing choices like Jack and the Harp. I love that they made the harp like a tall statuesque woman, and Jack, as he's in his early 20s, is just, to be frank, looking to bang something. And the fact that throughout the entire piece he's like giant breasts, like he is clearly a boy who is like Little Red, opening up, exploring his sexuality, exploring being a young male adult, and the fact that he comes out with this beautiful statuesque harp that literally looks like she just hates her life, being dragged around from man to man. I was like, smart. There's something you've done something smart there. Or like the depiction of Rapunzel's descent, the fact that she goes from relatively kept together at the end of the first act and her kind of just glee at getting away from the witch, to by the time you see her in Act 2 where she is totally descented, she's drinking. Like it's a very modern, well done interpretation of what that descent would look like. And just the puppet of the giant was really done. But then like other things like the baker and his wife, a lot of times they fell flat to me. Like their bickering was very flatline. Like there was no escalation to that. Like the whole go home after she loses the cow they didn't build up enough to have Hannah Waddingham come with that big energy of shut up, like go, like the cat, like go get the thing. So like that didn't quite work. Or the fact that the final interaction between the baker and his wife, they took away the fact that in the original script, it's the baker's wife who controls that moment, who sends him off 100 paces. And it shows once again that he is dependent on her, which then makes his change at the end of the show when he finally goes, no, I can't do this without my wife. She's going to be with me, but I can actually step out and not depend on her for direction all the time. The fact they took that away from her in that last minute kind of undercut a lot of stuff. So like some choices were really strong and made things really work. And then the stuff that didn't quite hit just stood out even more because of some of the choices. Like some choices worked really well, then other choices didn't quite work. Like the fact that the old man, the mysterious old man, is really dressed in a suit, yet he's supposed to be this forest hermit. It's like, why is he dressed that way? And yet he's wearing a backpack. Like some of the choices were just off to me. So I would put that under the unevenness of the direction of the piece, because ultimately they're the ones that have to make the choice of what goes and what stays. So Ryan, you are giving me a look.
But just because this isn't the first episode in which you've said unevenness of direction is your weakest element, and listening to all of these different threads that you're pulling together in this, would you rather more things be bad to even it out? Because that kind of like,
not at all.
But just the way that you say
that the choices did not work.
But you're saying like the really good things make the things that weren't as good more like prominent. It sounds like then you would prefer a washed out mediocre production to one that has some pretty inspired stuff that maybe makes some other things pale in comparison. I don't know. Like
nope. I mean the direction. Once again, it's the director's choices. Some of them worked really well, some of them didn't, and unfortunately, when the ones that didn't work just hit harder because some of their other choices were really good and came and hit their mark really well. So when you miss something, it's like, oh, it just kind of gets that much more pronounced. So I don't want a mediocre production. I want you to take a swing at it. I just think sometimes things won't work.
Just the way you frame it with the unevenness, I feel like it makes more sense to pick out the specific things you don't like than just say that in relation to the things that were good, I wish it was more even. Like that makes it sound like it's a thought that I've had a few times that you've brought this up in episodes that I'm just like, that doesn't really track.
Mariana, you also were giving a thinking look.
When you say that something, what's your metric for what works and what doesn't when talking? Well, whether it's just for this show in particular, if you want to keep it to this show in particular, but when you're asking, I'm curious because I feel like everyone's comparing it to different things in their head. And so
well, for me, when I was looking at this, so I'll keep it to this show. But like my first thing looking at it was, first of all, because I've watched this production before, so I knew about the whole child narrator routine thing. So the whole concept of they made the choice to have the child narrator, meaning that clearly it's going to be from the child's perspective and the whole doll pointing things. So like that was one element that was like, are they honoring that element? And if they're not, then sometimes that's not fully hitting. Other elements are like, what is your aesthetic like as a director? Because like clearly a director makes a choice, and I hope a director makes a choice of time, place, and design of some type of choice, whether like it's, as we said, the Canadian version that they did where it was all set in Canada, had that Canadian look to it, whether it's the original production that is very kind of fairy tale illustration with its design, or this one, which was kind of like modern meets steampunk meets child's imagination. So there's a bit more of a mix mash of things. So yeah, my biggest things were, did they hit their thing aesthetically, and what is like dramaturgically, did they kind of go and kind of give a solid through line? Because as a director, that is your job. You are overseeing your vision. Like if I came in and said, I want to do Into the Woods, but I want to set it, I don't know, what's a weird example? Under the sea. Like everything's going to be under the sea for Into the Woods. It's all going to be mermaids and fish.
Help.
And right? And if all of a sudden, like, something just doesn't jive, like all of a sudden you got a talking seagull, which Sure.
You're just describing Little Mermaid.
but the thing of, if you're doing Into the Woods where everything's under the water and all of a sudden you got a talking seagull, sure, a talking seagull could work. Does it fit design or aesthetically? No, but it was a choice you make, and I honor the choice you made. But as an audience member, you're gonna come away at anything you watch going, did that choice work? Did that cut in that film work? Like watching the movie version, did I like the fact that they cut a lot of the mysterious man and no more? No, but I get why Rob Marshall did it for the sake of time, but I don't feel it helped the story. In fact, it undercut that story and really kind of cut the Baker's big moment, which really sucked. So once again, choice by Lapine and Rob Marshall as the writers of the script. Did it work? I don't know if it did or not. In my opinion, it didn't. So
now my mind is just going through like what are all the equivalences in our Under the Sea version. Obviously, Milky White would be a manatee because sea cow.
I'm humming
obviously,
the Little Mermaid soundtrack in my head right now.
The wolf would be a shark. That makes sense. Yep. The giant might be like a scuba diver. If you think like the first SpongeBob movie, that's kind of like this big threatening force with like Cyclops
like in Happy Feet, when it takes that darker twist and mankind comes on the
so that's
scene,
that extent,
right?
All metaphor for climate change.
Yes.
We're doing it.
Yeah. Okay. The four of us, we will get together, and after we're done recording this, we will call up Sondheim and Lapine and get the rights for this.
Yeah,
I'm sure Sondheim would love an Into the Sea production.
Into the Sea. There's the title.
There we go. It's choices. Choices are made, and as a director, you got to make those choices. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. And then sometimes if you're going really big on a concept, your choices that won't work can really kind of stand out. So, all right, let's get into, do we think this production is worth the watching? Jill, as a aunt with two young nieces and nephews, is this how you would want to introduce them to this musical, or would you rather go back to like the film version or the '89 version?
Funny enough, I don't really find this musical like kid friendly. Like it can be. I think like kids can come to it, and like I said, like the production I was in, it was for a community theater production that predominantly the demographic is bring your kids to see a show. They usually do one in the spring, one in the fall, and at least one of those is family friendly. So Into the Woods that year was that. So that's part of the reason too why I think these innuendos weren't really on the nose as much for that production. We kind of kept the innocence a little bit more. But also, depending on the age of the child, I think possibly some of the stuff that this production did would just go over a kid's head, right? And we talked about, because this production in particular was very spectacle-esque in some moments, right? Like the giant's composition of and the deconstruction and reconstruction of the giant all over and the beanstalk and having these characters flood in and out. I definitely think it could be fantastical enough for a child to just kind of dwell in that, and you don't have to really worry of them asking about the birds and the bees, which is fine too if it does trigger that for them. But I would recommend this. I think this production is worth watching. Like I think I'm glad you brought up, Mariana, the whole like opera sort of case study thing of how I think this is definitely a musical where any take can sort of be put on it. There isn't just this is the version that we're grasping for or needing to put forth on the stage. And I think this musical, the way it was written, it does have a lot of space and breathing room to be interpreted different ways, but yet the interwoven story plots will always be the same because that's just what the content of the piece is. So I think if this is like your first intro to Into the Woods, it does a good job of sewing those connections together. And everyone's like character work was really grounded, even if it might have been an approach to a character that you're like, that doesn't work for me. I think it was still sort of grounded in a sense of they were playing the piece of the puzzle that they needed to be playing. And I love that it's site specific too, right? Like that you're getting this, you're getting to see a production of Into the Woods in the woods. So I would say it's worth watching, but I would also say, because there are some differences with the take on the piece, and we'll get into this, but some characters are sometimes split or merged together. It would definitely be worth your while to check out other versions, like the movie version or the Bernadette Peters version, which I actually have seen that a long time ago.
Rewatch it. It's just great.
Yeah, just to kind of to get more. I would argue you'll never see the exact same production of this musical, which makes it awesome. So
unless you
yes,
rewatch the exact same production,
right?
then you will.
Yes, it's worth
like
the
if
watch.
You rewatch the Bernadette Peters one. Yes, you've seen it twice.
Explore other woods, I would say. Yeah.
Mariana, what are your thoughts?
Well, you know me right now. We're in a pandemic. Just watch theater and enjoy. Gosh. Live people in front of a live audience. Just have a ball.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, watch anything. Watch everything. Art is important. Art is good. Give funding to the arts. Do all those things.
Agreed.
It's interesting. I sort of think right. It was interesting watching the credits. And of course they would put this in the credits, but it didn't occur to me until I saw it that they would put it there. But it says like this musical or this the choice for a child to play the narrator is not part of this show. It was a choice by the director. It was interesting that they, because of course you would have to, because I imagine they had to get permission and.
Oh yeah.
But so it's sort of. It's right. I like what you said, Jill, of visit other woods as well. But of course, like I'm always, my heart home is going to be the 89 version. It's my origin story in more ways than one. And I think what is different about that original, because Into the Woods has had, I mean, sorry, this sentence is going so many different places at once.
Love it.
My mom is often very surprised when people the reaction that people get when they hear that she was part of the original show, just because they were putting this together in a time when like Phantom of the Opera was opening, right? It was the era of the big British musical, 80s on Broadway, like not the sexiest time, and they're putting together this really twisted, weird fairy tale musical with Sondheim, who people were like, you're a genius, but we're not sure how we feel about it. And so the idea that show has become this, so many people get introduced to musical theater through this show.
Yeah.
Like, and it's
just
like,
got goosebumps.
And it's one of those, and growing up, my mom only let me watch Act 1. I was like, right. It was when they were doing the revival, and I was 6 or 7, that I realized there was part 2. But all to say, it's wonderful and really still surprising to her that incredible, huge life. And that there is a junior version that you can get, anyway. So yeah, watch it and visit other woods. I think something that is really interesting about the original is you're seeing this show before it became the it's not a phenomenon, but it's a lot of people know it. And so what I do think is interesting about that original is the way that you see it. It's very much a world of adults. Very, explicitly, this is an adult world using these tropes of stories that we tell to children. And so having those adult human characters really working the problem and trying to figure it out so that they can get what they want. I think there's something really interesting there. And then you get the original conception, which is the narrator, which I know we're going to talk about later. But I hope there was sense in there. Sometimes I think being raised on Into the Woods means that all my thoughts also do this.
Oh, yeah. I'm with you there.
Yeah, no, that made total sense. Yeah, I mean, this is Sondheim's most produced work. Out of all his canon, this is the one that gets done most often. And I mean, just thinking about the different versions that have come to Broadway, like there was the original and then like the one your mom and stepdad produced that actually had the storybooks as trees. And I remember watching that with Laura Benanti. So like every version is a reinterpretation of this fairy tale. So, but it is such a cultural touchstone for people.
Yeah, and sorry, last thing, and it's so interesting. Another story that my mom has told me is how in the original, like even if it wasn't necessarily written this way, the baker's wife was the heart of the show, and so much of that was just Joanna Gleason's performance, which no one was able to match really, especially my mom, who understudied and was her standby, and my mom would tell stories about how Joanna Gleason could get laughs on lines that no one to this day has gotten laughs on, and how it was just an impossible task for my mom to fill that role. But how in the 2002 revival, with Laura Benanti as Cinderella sort of became the heart of the show in a way. And so it's interesting when you think about who the adult characters are and who takes care of each other. Like, of course, as you said, Mac, Baker's wife, Baker can't get by without Baker's wife, and that's a huge part of Act Two. But the fact that Cinderella starts with "No one is alone" and the way that she works, and her coming into her mothering over the course of the show. Anyway, all to say, visit all the woods.
Visit all the woods. Love that. Ryan, as our resident TA and future professor, would you end up putting this on a syllabus?
Ooh, that's such a good question. Sorry.
No, he asks me this every time, and like I never have a good answer, or rarely do. So again, not a musical theater specialist, so I can't imagine what course I would be teaching where I would decide, yep, Into the Woods is going on the syllabus. Like
American Theater Overview class?
Well, okay, so if I'm doing American Theater Overview, there's really probably only 2 musicals I would consider putting on the syllabus, and that I think is Oklahoma or now Hamilton. Because I think those are actually interesting meditations on what is America through theater. And no, I'm not putting 1776 on there before you ask.
I wasn't expecting you to, Ryan.
But yeah, so if it was just an American theater overview, no, and nothing against this show, I enjoyed it, but like I don't think this is necessarily an interesting enough cultural touchstone to be representative of. Again, if I'm doing a course on American theater because it's me, it's not going to be a musicals course or even like 50-50. Like there will be maybe 1 or 2 on there. So if I was as the TA in whatever course, whether it's a musical course, I don't know why I got hired for that one, but a job's a job. Squawk, it's a living. But but yeah, if just any course I'm doing and the prof is already put Into the Woods on syllabus, I would certainly consider showing students this production. I think it's like a good one. It definitely gets the idea across. My kind of one ding, as I mentioned earlier, was that I found it was like tough getting into it in the first number, but then after that I thought it was pretty straightforward and good, and yeah, I liked a lot of the choices it made. But I think what I really need to do now, hearing all this conversations, I need to visit more woods, because I don't think I have enough to really make that decision. And after everything I've heard all of you say, I think after I've had that tour of various different woods, there's probably others that I would more likely choose to, if I'm only going to use our limited class time to introduce students to one of them. I'd be surprised if after all of that journeying, this one still turns out to be the number 1 pick. But as like my first stage version of this, and really, like, I'm not going to lie, the movie, while I did see it, didn't leave a big impression on me. So yeah, this I think is a very strong production. It hits the mark in my book. And yeah, I'll get back to you after I've done all those other trips to the woods.
Love it. Love it. I mean, I will say, for me, I think this is a fine adaptation. It's its own unique look, which I appreciate. They didn't just try and copy the '89 production. They really swung at it, and I think overall their good choices outweigh the few things that didn't quite hit. So I would recommend it. However, the 89 recording for me is like Mariana, it is my definitive Woods. Like it is my touchstone. It's the one I grew up on watching. I have very fond memories of watching it as a teenager, and after Sweeney Todd, this was kind of the next big Sondheim that got me really into his canon and an appreciation of his canon. Also West Side Story's in there too, but he wasn't as heavy on that one. Like this is a true Sondheim. So I would say if you're going to show people and introduce them to the Woods, I would go with the 89 version first, because it's a little bit more accessible because of its classical aesthetic, classical style to it. I think it's shot a little bit better. So like the opening number comes across much clearer. And also you got, like, as Mariana said, Joanna Gleason as the baker's wife. Like nobody has beat her. Like Amy Adams played it in Central Park. Great. She had her own interpretation, but Joanna Gleason, like she, as Mariana pointed out, and from my research when I was doing this for my podcast episode, she really did help shape who this character was. And it really is her portraying this character on the stage. And so when a role so iconic is written around her, and there's a reason why she beat Patti LuPone for the Tony that year, in a giant upset of theater history. When everybody thought it was going to be Patti LuPone as Reno Sweeney and anything goes, and surprise, it's Joanna Gleason. And so there's you need to watch it just for Joanna Gleason alone, because she just brings such heart to the Bakers with that I don't think anybody else has found. Like Joanna Gleason's death as the baker's wife hit so much harder than anything else I've seen. Like other productions I've seen, like, okay, like I know it's coming. There's a mixed emotion on her death. But overall, it is a sad moment for her, where just as she's found her way back onto the path and has discovered her kind of direction she's going to go in, and then ultimately she's stepped on by the giant. Fun fact, though, she actually was supposed to die via poison apple, apparently, in an out-of-town Broadway tryout that I watched. So apparently there was a version that she wasn't going to stun her, but she was going to step off the path to eat an apple. And the witch goes, "Don't eat any fruit in the woods."
Very biblical.
Okay. Yes. Right? Yeah. So there's that. But yeah, I would say start with the 89 and then show them kind of where things are branched off from. Because the 89 is such a great roots of the piece. It's the one that Sondheim and Lapine have had the closest involvement with. So I think it's closest to what they envisioned the piece to be, even though like Sondheim's been very happy with the different interpretations. Apparently he went and saw this version 3 times and said he really enjoyed it. So nothing wrong with that. If Sondheim gives you a thumbs up, that's a pretty good sign. But I mean, I think start with the original and then branch out. I would say the same thing with any production. If you start with the original version, they can always branch out and see the different woods that have sprung from it. But start with the root and then grow from there, is what I would say.
Nice botanical metaphor.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, let's get into some text-based questions, because Sondheim gives us a lot to chew on, just like Milky White at the end of Act 1. There we go. Okay, so this production is unique it was a production that split the normally double cast role of the narrator and mysterious man into 2 separate actors. How did this casting decision impact your viewing experience? Is something lost or something gained by this choice? Mariana, you've alluded to this element of the production, so I'll let you start.
I just sort of come with questions. I mean, it was really interesting because it took me a second, and all of a sudden I thought, wait, did they split it into 3? Because when the mysterious man is haunting the witch with, I'm trying to get you what you wanted and all these sorts of things, all of a sudden I'm thinking, wait, is there another person who's the narrator, and then is there this, and then I just sort of got a bit turned around, just because I think, and this could totally be my wacko understanding of the original, But there's something really interesting about the antagonism between the witch and the narrator.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that the narrator comes in as the mysterious man and is the baker's father, I think is just a structural question
Mm-hmm.
of the play in general. And sure, if you split the narrator role, you kind of dodge that answering that question.
Mm-hmm.
But I missed it a bit because I think there's something more going on about how conscious is the witch of being part of this story or not, which is, I think, part of the original conception of having the narrator be part of the story and then truly be killed. And it's not all just a nightmare. So again, those are just sort of questions I had, and maybe some things that I missed, and maybe my association with the original was so strong that it took me a second to remember who even was saying what, because then I had questions about why the mysterious man would be like having a beef with the witch other than their past history, which we know from the prologue. So mostly questions, and again, sort of what I said earlier about the very clear choice of youth narrator. I wonder how it might have changed if it had been a teenager or someone a bit older, and how maybe some of those other choices we've already talked about would land as a someone who's reading like a 9 or 10-year-old.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a whole element that I totally forgot about, which is the fact that does the witch know she's in a story? Because she has the line in Act 2 of, some people don't like the way you've been telling it, which means, is this witch very cognizant of the fact that he's been here the whole time? Like, kind of ripping her down and taking away her magic? And because it's the narrator who says, as is the way of all fairy tales, when you trade age for youth, you lose something along the way. Ergo, the witch loses her magic. It's a narrator's choice to take her magic away in that moment. So yeah, interesting. I totally forgot that extra fourth dimensional bit of this chessboard. So, oh wow, that's interesting. Jill, you're nodding along, so I'll let you talk for a bit.
Yeah, my brain is exploding with all the ideas.
This new Mariana development.
Yeah, like snowballing off of Mariana. I was also confused because, again, I feel like I've referenced it so often, but it is the freshest thing in my brain. Of the production of Interludes I was in, we did do Mysterious Man was the narrator. And what I loved about that is that it like creates the extra layer of, as an audience member, like we're watching a character talk about characters. So like he's the only, like that actor is the only one kind of like in two worlds at once, right? We almost get like a second sphere of character work by having the mysterious man also the narrator. Like our version, we made it very known that this is the same person. And one of the things I think that the mysterious man does beautifully, and especially as we're gaining exposition in Act 1, is I would argue like it's the mysterious man that keeps the plot going, because he's the one that plants the riddles in the baker's brain to keep him going on the journey or to make him pivot or to make him question. And what was wonderful is that like our narrators do that in the stories we tell, right? By just being the narrator and sort of making him the mysterious man. And then we find out that's also the baker's father. Now we get into another layer of like storytelling and it being generational. And then we also find out the baker and the baker's wife have a son. So it's passed on to passed on to passed on. And I'm getting goosebumps because I love when my brain does this thing where it's like, I don't really know what we're talking about, but then it ends up being this cool thing that's discovered. Because yeah, so that again, I would never even have thought to split them up, right? Or to have them different.
Yeah.
And I guess it could work, but for me it's not as strong because I like what because looking back at the 89 version, it was combined. And then I had to go back and sort of look at the history of the production. And there's actually like a lot of times, more than I thought, that they do split these up. Like, I think it was, if I can pull up the years again, The 1990 West End version split them. The 2007 West End revival split them. Our production did, the Central Park production did, and the recent Hollywood Bowl 2019 production also split. So arguably now, it's almost sliced down the middle. There's as many productions with it combined as there are with it separated. Which to me, that's interesting because I'm like, is the production itself evolving, right? Like, are we dissociating them for a reason now? Like, that's a whole nother, like, philosophical maybe conversation to have. But, right? I know. I'm like, I could talk about The Mysterious Man, the narrator for ages. Yeah, so I think it was interesting what they were doing with this production, especially it being a kid, right? They're going, like, stark different now. It's not just, like, two middle-aged men. It's now, there's a generational divide between those characters. But it made me question, like, why is the mysterious man here, right? Like, similar to what Mariana's saying, like, what is the relationship to the mysterious man and the witch besides only being the baker's dad? But then I'm like, okay, then why do we even have a narrator? Like, it took my brain a while to just, I saw them so much as a cohesive package and, like, dotting the I's and crossing the T's in this production as a unit. So with them separated, I was like, I had to just do a little bit more investigative kind of work. Anyways, that's just a lot. That's a lot just thrown there. So I'm going to pass the torch.
Ryan, as our resident dramaturg, what do you think?
So I'm hearing everything you're all saying, but perhaps this is me coming from it with much less of a frame of reference to other versions of this. I emphatically thought that the way they did this works so well. In fact, I refrained from getting into it and is this worth a watch? But, like, I think this decision is the reason why I loved this production so as much as I did. And there's kind of two big parts of it where I think, like, I honestly can't imagine it being done the other way that you're all describing it, like, which I understand there's historical precedent for it, but this being, like, my kind of real first inroad into it, like, I just think this is, to me, the definitive way of doing these characters. And so there's sort of two big reasons why I thought it worked so well. The first one is, like you've all kind of been saying about how the narrator, when he's doubled with Mysterious Man, inserts himself in the story and shows his control of the story by planting the seeds in the baker's mind. That, I think, kind of if that is done, it would ruin what I thought was a very strong line when they're sacrificing the narrator to the giant. And correct me if I'm wrong, does that happens in every production? That's not just unique to this one? Because the narrator says, I wrote it down, like, I tell the story, I'm not part of it. So if he is the same person as the Mysterious Man, then that suddenly becomes a lie. And I liked the sincerity of that because he is not, in fact, part of it as we've been watching.
He's in a different costume, though. So, like, as the audience, just as, like, a thing, but, like, usually it's, at least in the production I was in, the Mysterious Man was at least put on, like, a jacket or a hat.
So then they might as well just be different characters in my mind, if that's how you're going to do it, which this production
But
did.
it's like, we knew it was the same actor, but, like, the people in the story wouldn't have.
So then we, the audience, know that, oh, he's kind of lying here because he put on the character's costume to be that character. And I kind of like the fact that we do have these, like, two divisions of the storyteller and the story being told. Like, it's, I don't know, I just do a lot of research with narratology and stuff, and I think I'm not going to get into why hetero versus a homo diegetic narrator makes more sense in this context, because you don't need to hear that. But, like, but yeah, I like that moment felt so strong for me when they all turn, like, to the narrator, be like, it's your fault and you're the one to be sacrificed, because it kind of has this shattering effect of the division between these worlds, that, oh wait, they can see him. And it's sort of like what was brought up before about how does the witch know she's part of this story, and I love that kind of solution, that there's this external person who's telling the story, let's sacrifice him to the giant and all of our problems will be solved, and it doesn't. Like, Jill, you want to comment on that?
Again, it's just interesting now, because we talked about, like, the explosiveness of moments and throughout this piece through, like, different characters. And I would say that, like, them noticing the little kid as the narrator was another one of those, like, wait, what? Why? How? When did that? Because it did seem like all of a sudden they're like, it's you. And I'm like, wait, did they know that he was telling their story the whole time? Like, why all of a sudden did they recognize this boy? Did they sacrifice this? Like, it just was a bit stark.
Like,
it was like
I just thought it was a powerful moment of sudden lucidity that they all kind of collectively experience, that, wait a minute, we're characters in a story, which, yeah, like you can kind of then go back and read through, were they aware of it at various different points? But I like that it wasn't acknowledged until then.
Yeah, again, that maybe builds into a stylistic element that this production does, is it snaps you into like, oh, yeah. Guess this is happening now. Guess this moment is
that felt
exploded
strong
on
to
the
me.
stage.
I liked those shifts. I thought it would have been kind of, to me, weaker by comparison if like they either just always knew that they were in a story or we just kind of don't like. But this kind of brings me to my reason number 2 why I thought this is such a strong choice to split them up, is because, well, so, and this goes back to what I said at the very beginning about why The Children Will Listen was, I thought, the strongest song, certainly in this, is that the fact that the narrator is the baker's son. Is that's not usually the case, as I understand it? If it's not usually a little kid, or
no. So normally, like, the whole thing with the cyclical nature of the story is like their narrator and like the mysterious man are like the father, so it's father, son, and then the musical ends with the baker talking to the baby, just on stage, sitting on a log, and then he's telling the story now, and he's become the narrator of the piece.
So if that's the case, so wait, the baby becomes the narrator, who's also the father. That's just weird. That's like so Oedipal.
No. The baker becomes the narrator to his son.
Okay,
who is the baby.
Okay, that makes more sense.
So it's the fact that his mysterious man was also the narrator, passed the story down to his son, and now you're adding on, adding on to the story.
What I like about the narrator now being the son all along is that it kind of, this is the story he's telling about his dad, not the story that his dad tells him. And I think that once we get to that moment at the end where the witch is singing that song about the children listening and they go into the woods, it kind of gives the whole thing a new twist that you didn't see coming, at least, or I didn't see coming. That suddenly, and it goes back to what Jill, you were saying before about the costumes, that this is the child's imagination. We understand that before, but now at that very end of the play, we get this sense of, oh, that's the story we've been following this whole time. The child's understanding, like, reinterpretation of the story that his dad told him, but he's been our storyteller all along. It doesn't go from the baker's dad told him this story, and then now the baker's telling this story. It's all been one story this whole time. And I thought, yeah, that just culminated in that song as just like a very powerful, like, the generations are all there, but it's the children have listened and they're the ones telling the story from the start. And I cannot picture that being as impactful really any other way. I'm not saying it can't or wouldn't, but this, I think, handled it very strongly.
Yeah, I mean, like, I will say for me, I didn't mind this choice of splitting the role. I mean, I was very much more used to the double cast with Tom, what's his last name, Mariana, who played the narrator? Tom...
Rich.
Pardon?
Aldrich?
Yes, Aldrich, playing the narrator, because he had such a definitive image in my mind of what the narrator should be, as this kind of professor quirky guy telling this story. But I mean, I think what they did, these directors did a pretty solid job of nailing the bookends, because at the beginning of the show, I don't know if anybody caught that, but you hear the baker as the father saying, "I hate you, get out," in kind of an augmented echo voice. And then the kid appears on stage. So you get a little bit of their fight before the show starts, and then at the end he comes back. So I think there was some nice bookending there. I mean, the fact that they also got more lines in about parents and children. So like Sondheim's lines about, what do you leave to your child when you're dead? Only whatever you put in its head. Things that your father and mother have said, which were left to them to careful what you say. So the fact that the directors went back into the cut Sondheim lyrics and brought more of those parent and child motifs and lines, I think worked. I think this is the only way you could do it, which is where you have like a young, like, early teenager or like just on the cusp of teenager child doing the story. But for me personally, I do like the narrator and Mysterious Man being one and the same. I think there is something just joyfully fun about that. And like one of my best laughs, I remember watching this for the first time in the 89 version, is when the narrator's doing his line of, when they're talking about the giant and they're trying to figure out who they're going to give to the giant, he does stuff. Now these characters don't like fully, I never fully had to comprehend this type of thing. He's going on a very professor academic viewpoint of these characters, and slowly but surely you just see all of the cast just turning their heads, slowly but surely acknowledging him. Like, that got me the first time. I almost died laughing that it's like just that. It's so funny the way that is blocked, where it's somebody like that. And also there's just some magic in the fact that throughout the entire piece, the narrator and Mysterious Man are jumping back and forth. Like the fact that in the death of the Mysterious Man, like literally 2 seconds later, he's back in his narrator suit that he goes from. Because like in the original production, it's a full wig costume swap that he does. And there's magic in that I still don't know how they did that quick change. Like, it's just so fast. It's just so impressive. So I do think there's some magic in that character of the narrator, Mysterious Man, when they're sharing the role. Because as an audience, you're never quite fully sure. Once again, do they know what's going on in the story? Do they not know? Like, does the witch know? Like, I think there's just so much more mystery and question, and you still get that cyclical nature told out without the child. So I think there are good and pros and cons to both versions. I think as a director, you have to make the choice, once again, of which version you go with, because now there are versions that Sondheim has done and given to people where you can split the role. I remember one local production did it where they did split the role, but they made them two like roughly middle-aged men, like doing both parts, and I was kind of like, well, that's kind of boring.
Yeah, I think if you're going to make them both middle-aged men, you might as well combine them. I like that the narrator is the child here, because it's not just that children will listen. It's not just a promise for the future. The child has already listened, and it's their version of the story we're hearing. Yeah. And that's what I thought made it really work.
All right, let's get into the next question, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot to unpack here, too. So, do we feel that the sexual politics of this musical still resonate today? Jill, as a former Little Red, whose storyline is most affected by the sexuality and sexual politics of the piece, has a whole song dedicated to it. Yeah. What do you think?
It's funny because this production was done in 2010, which when I think of like the teens of the 20s, it's not that far away, but to see how society has like arguably exponentially grown in like technology and like social conversation and stuff from in a decade. I mean, it's funny because you see that in like the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. They are their own thing, but when you're living it, you don't really think, but it is different. Like to me, when we watch, and this has happened with other reviews we've done, when we watch productions that are done in like 2012 or 2010 or even 2008, right? It's amazing to me how society was so different, or like approached things differently, or showed things or didn't show things versus what we are dealing with now. And so what I'll say to that is, me personally, it was very interesting watching the sexual innuendos and dialogue of this piece from a 2021 lens. Because it was like, again, it was done safely, you could see, but it was just like, whoa, why are they showing it that way? Because I think now I would argue like when that is sort of used in theater as like a plot point or a plot driving like element, it really is like, talk about dramatical due diligence. Like it really is like, we're doing it this way for this reason. And I think part of that, it is a safety thing, and part of that is like you're talking about it in a way, or you're showing it in a way that is like universal and safe and packing a punch to what the messaging is supposed to mean, right? You're kind of ticking more boxes, but like a lot of the times in this production, things were like messy, but messy as in like how they were staged, how like sexuality was staged was messy, but also like it didn't feed into what the plot was doing. And again, this talks back in like this explosive starkness. It made me a little bit like alarmed, or like, oh my goodness, like we're talking about the wolf eating Little Red, and that is shown in a certain way that I would have never seen shown that way, which is fine. It just didn't fit in with. So I feel like some people would red flag some of the moments in this piece of just like being like, let's not do it that way. But it's interesting because the question meaning like, does it resonate with us today? As we've talked about, like as much as things are done on stage in like a sexual or physical way for a reason, with the exponential growth of things, we can also talk about how children today arguably are matured and exposed to things way earlier than all of us sitting here doing this panel, for instance. Like, the innocence of children has knocked down even like younger, right? Unfortunately, due to media exposure, due to more open conversation, and there's like pros and cons to that for sure. But so in a way it resonates, but not within this story, if that makes sense. Like, because it's like people are seeing these things. This is happening in everyday life. But it just seemed very out of place, like in this production. That's kind of how I'll answer with that in a very rambly way. But
Mariana?
I had sort of similar questions about the question, like, do the sexual politics of the show still resonate with us today? I'm like, are there not still sexual politics today?
Right.
Sexual politics resonate. Yeah, I agree. I sort of right. I think there's a really interesting conversation to be had about the relationship between performance of sexual maturity and actual emotional maturity. Because I think like part of the terror of being like going through puberty is like your body can't contain all of the feelings that it has, and you don't, and because of the way that even in those open conversations, I feel like about sexuality, about intimacy, about all of these things, there's still like such a struggle with language and vocabulary to describe what's happening to you. You might know that you want to experience something, but what even is that thing? I don't even know. I know that it's probably scary and invasive, and I don't even know what that is, but I want it. But should I want it because I'm being told all these different things? All to say, I would agree that the overt performance of sexual confidence, I find a bit confusing, given the real fear and confusion of these characters. And I think, especially with Jack and Little Red, Jack might fixate on the giant breast, but they also say, I know things now that I never knew before. I know things. What even are the things? They can't even say what these things are.
Yeah. And
so there's the performance of knowing, I think is very knowing something, and not knowing what it is very different than I know things now and I know things now, you know. And I just, those are just sort of questions I have. And right, I think it's all part of a bigger conversation that societally we need to have about, like, I'm of the belief that we need to normalize conversations about sexuality and intimacy from much younger, and we should have knowledge that is stigmatized, and we should do all these things, and that there isn't just one kind of intimacy. There are a lot of different kinds of intimacy. It doesn't just have to be sexual. There are different kinds of there's all this, we should have those conversations, and that's not to take away from, let's have a sexually empowered Little Red, let's do it. But I think what the show, what the music and what the words and what the story is doing is I know things now, very powerful things. There's not even, what is it? So to hack it down so concretely to just sex feels, I'm not sure if that's what the story actually.
Just a tiny caveat to that too. It's really small, but like I was confused. Like, why are we getting? So you talked about like knowing sexuality, like we're getting the showing of sexuality from the characters like Red and Jack, which we talked about them being like a lower tier, like a younger tier. So I was confused, like, why aren't we seeing that in the more adult characters as well, or in a certain way? Like even the affair that the baker's wife has with Prince Charming, we don't see any sexuality that happens there. We just see them kind of coming out of their romp in the woods. But then the way they stage like Little Red stuff, like we see some stuff that might have been done to her or is being done to her. And I was a little bit uncomfortable with that dissonance between the showing of sexuality in only that tier of characters versus not in another. That makes sense.
Yeah, and sorry, one last thing. I know I'm talking a lot, but I think
jump in.
I think there's a really interesting question to be had about consent, especially with Little Red. Because like the wolf is literally a predator.
Yeah.
So it's one thing to, if this is a consensual encounter and Little Red's enjoying it, okay, then that's definitely one story that we're telling. And maybe I Know Things Now is she had this experience and she wanted this experience and great, good. Let's have more consent.
Yeah.
Ryan, what are your thoughts? Considering this was a question you came up with. This is your question.
We wrote these questions like 4 months ago. I don't know what to tell you. I don't recall what the thinking behind this question was, and I don't really know how much more there even is to add after everything both of you have said. Something that like is going through my mind as we have this conversation and kind of zeroing in on Little Red and the Wolf as this sort of case study for a lot of the, like there's a lot of horny energies certainly in this production, but I think just it's inherent to the text as a whole. But like, but just kind of zeroing in on those characters, Mac, it reminds me of a conversation we had like a long while ago, but kept coming back to, about how you wanted to, whether you wanted to direct it yourself or it's just something you wanted to see, but you wanted to do a very contemporary present day setting production of Into the Woods.
Oh, yes.
Where you said like, oh yeah, the wolf should be like a creepy guy in a van, and I
never said creepy guy in a van.
Okay, something to that effect.
A guy in a park, and if Little Red's dressed in her everyday school uniform, and he's sitting there ogling her on a park bench, that's something very common, which is horrible that these types of things get sexualized, which should not be sexualized, but there are people in the world who do. And I think there's something about the wolf and just the way you can, once again, there's that I have a concept on that I've festering, and I know Ryan doesn't like the concept.
Well, and why I recoil from that concept isn't because I think it's an invalid reading of the text. I always just think it's too simplistic a reading of the text, and because to me that's, I think, it is about that. Like, it is about male predators and young women and this kind of weird like consent, like, Mariana, you've been talking about. And I think this kind of, it's very clearly there. This isn't just a straightforward production of, hey, look at all these fairy tales that we're reviving. Like, this is very specifically a 1980s contemporary vision of that is put in the setting of fairy tales. And I think what, Mac, your vision of that production, like it neuters the metaphor in a way. It's like, to me, it calls to mind like, okay, we're doing a stage adaptation of Animal Farm by George Orwell, but instead of pigs, what if they're communists from Soviet Russia, man? Doesn't that make you think? Like, it's already an allegory for that, so why bother? Like, just do the pigs. So like, and that's, I think like, it's not a good answer to the question, like, as phrased here, but I think like, I don't know if productions really need to lean into like the sexual politic element and what does this mean today, post Me Too, post discussions, open discussions of rape culture. Like, I kind of do think, you know, it's there and it's sadly still resonant, and maybe for different reasons than it was then, but you can kind of, I think, just let the text speak for itself, and you know, your mileage will vary how much you want to play it up. Like, this production certainly played up the creepiness of the wolf, I think, which kind of made it on one hand harder to see.
Just wait till you watch the 89 version, Ryan.
Okay.
The wolf costume there is very sexual. The fact that you had to reduce his appendage because in the original production it was too distracting. So
yeah, I can see that. But like, yeah, I think that it just sort of, I think with the way that Sondheim and Lapine wrote this play, it just comes with the territory. And even if you do like a very intending to be child friendly version where, oh, hey, it's just fun fairy tales, I think, you know, it's, some elements are just going to be hard to miss regardless of how innocent you are to it. That's my kind of just thoughts about, like, as in lieu of a good answer.
Yes. Well, I mean, I still have that idea festering, so who knows, right?
I just don't know what the point is. It's like the dumb Animal Farm premise that I just described. Okay. Why bother?
Once again, leave it to me. Who knows? Either way, so for me, I go, yes, this piece still has a lot of sexual politics that resonate today. And I think what Lapine and Sondheim did really well when they were adapting all these fairy tales is, if you read those original fairy tales, there's a lot of sexual politics in them that Sondheim and Lapine then brought into the stories, like, as well. So they brought these kind of, unfortunately, some of these timeless elements of the story, like sexualization of Little Red. If you go back and read the original fairy tale interpretations, that's been something that's always been in those fairy tales. The fact that the princes are fetishizing these women throughout the piece, like, there's so much. Also, like we talked about, Ryan, you brought up the fact that the baker's wife, she's literally identified as her husband and by her gender. So, like, what does that say? That, like, there's still a lot of women in the workplace who are just identified by either their job or by somebody else. Like she doesn't even get a name. So I think there's a lot of different sexual gender politics that this piece brings up, and that as a cast and as a director, you got to do some work on this piece, because Sondheim and Lapine give you a lot to dig into with this. Like, once again, you have a choice of how sexual you want the wolf to be. Do you literally want, like just like in the 89 production, where there's literally a dangling appendage, very visible on stage, or do you want it to be a little bit more subtle in the blocking of what they do with Little Red on the swing, or Little Red kind of flopping around on the bed with the wolf? Like, different ways you can interpret it. And I think what the conversations that come up from that are still very resonant. And what Sondheim gave you is, once again, Sondheim being the brilliant, to be honest, I think he is the Shakespeare musical theater. I think what he gave you is just so much to digest and to interpret and to talk about. I think very interesting. And I think going forward this production, you definitely need to have an intimacy coach brought on to the team, because there is a lot of stuff in here that I was like, ooh, yeah, definitely. I don't think there was one back in 2010 when this was done, but now you would definitely need to have an intimacy coach.
Well, we can't speak to the behind the scenes going on to this production. Maybe there was one, maybe there wasn't. It's more just for the safety of the actors.
According to the credits, there wasn't one.
Often they go uncredited, though.
Oh, that's too bad. But either way, yes,
Which
I do think
that's a problem in itself.
That is a problem in itself, but it doesn't mean that they didn't have one in the process here. I don't know. We can't really speak to that.
We can't tell. Yeah. But either way, yes, I do think the sexual politics still resonate today. And Sondheim and Lapine have created this element of adaptation where they've just brought these sexual politics that were in the original fairy tale, and they've brought them into, as Ryan said, the 1980s modern lens of their interpretation of those elements of the story. Because those original fairy tales are very sexual.
To briefly shout out, just because you're bringing back the 80s trope, and one thing I like about this production, because I think it fed into the 80s vibe, and as someone who I'm usually cast as the avant-garde princess, if I'm cast as a princess at all, I love the different viewpoints we get of Cinderella and Rapunzel. I
Yes.
like that we get to see them grungy. I like that they have the steampunky vibes in their evolution. We see the off the shoulder dress, and we, you know, that I as like a modern woman like seeing. Because again, I think this production, like, you can afford to do that without it like muddying the piece, right? Or even like them in their own pieces, like in their own Rapunzel, in their own Cinderella. I like that way. And then once again, Jack's mother's tool belt. Like, you know what I mean? There was just like elements of breaking down the like ingenue perfect woman viewpoint, right? Through this production of women. So that was, that's just like a tiny little shout out. Yeah.
Yes. Well, speaking of Rapunzel, let's dive into her because she often gets overlooked when you do Into the Woods. So, is Rapunzel a fully developed character or merely a plot device in other characters' stories? Mariana, as your mom was in the original production, I don't know if she's ever mentioned if Rapunzel had a bigger story track than what she has in the version now. Because, like, obviously there was the cut song that got brought back. Like, that was the one big element that I know was left in the original.
Yeah. Right. Other than the addition of our little world, I'm not thinking of anything from the original. But I don't know. I'll ask a follow-up.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting. When you asked that question, I was sort of thinking of, well, she was stolen as I mean, this might be going way too actor brain, sort of. How would I justify my performance of Rapunzel? Well, like the witch raised her to be what she is. So it was really interesting in this one, seeing a resentment really early on. Whereas it's interesting if you think about the witch having raised Rapunzel to be this perfect little princess in a tower, who only, is obsessed with her hair, because what else would you be obsessed with, having been raised by this parent who keeps telling you to obsess over these things? It's interesting. I never really thought about that before as perhaps a justification for how she's been portrayed before, as perhaps on the face of it, maybe a shallow sort of person. This production made me sort of think, oh, well, maybe the reason why we could justify Rapunzel as seeming more like a plot device before is because that's what the witch made her. And that guilt is that not only was she trying to protect Rapunzel, but she actively, the raising of Rapunzel made Rapunzel not ready for the world. So then I have questions. So then I have more questions, right? So if she was resentful before and always wanted to get away, and is just more and more, falls into the rut that we see her in, where does that start? If she was resenting the witch before she escaped, right? If she was this pretty little princess because that's all her mom made her to be, and then she went out into the world and really wasn't ready. There's a question of parenting there, and I think, so now it's interesting. I would never really have thought to ask those questions before. I would have just sort of thought, Rapunzel,
To piggyback off that a little bit, like, something that certainly struck me while watching it is the team behind the movie Tangled certainly seems to have taken a lot of cues from the Rapunzel witch relationship, as particularly like Dan Fogelman of This Is Us and Gallivant fame wrote the screenplay or co-wrote the screenplay for Tangled. And I feel like, I see a lineage of thought from Sondheim to the Disneyfied version, which is interesting how this play seems so hell-bent on projecting the Disneyfication of these fairy tale characters, as we've talked about with the sexual politics just a moment ago, but kind of getting the original sort of essence of the source back in there.
Fun fact, Mother Gothel's voice actress, Donna Murphy, played the witch in Central Park.
That is a fun fact. But like I've always respected about the movie Tangled is just how it really like latches onto this mother-daughter, like horrible sort of domestic abuse kind of, toxic relationship as the beating heart of the story, and what kind of Rapunzel's arc has to be overcoming that. And now, if this did in fact inspire that, I kind of feel like Sondheim and co did Rapunzel dirty a little bit here. It was kind of my thought, and just in terms of like, not that she doesn't get her own kind of liberation, but just that the story sort of forgets about her and her branch kind of fizzles out. And I think it's kind of just a consequence of there's too many goddamn characters in this story. Like that they don't necessarily all get to have complete full-fleshed arcs. I understand that, yeah, it is interesting the way she Rapunzel functions as this plot device early on, but I would have liked to see that pay off with more of like a, not necessarily a redemption arc, but with like a self-actualization arc for her that, you know, she does not seem happy by the end of it. Like, and, you know, that
she commits suicide.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, the giant.
Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah. So very clearly isn't happy, but like, duh. But yeah, like it just, yeah. I would have liked to see #justice for Rapunzel in this. But then, hey, we get a Disney movie down the line that gives her that. So that's the thing about these public domain characters. There's always going to be someone else to pick up the baton and create a new version that maybe fixes places where others have erred, or intentionally or not.
Jill.
That's just funny because I was supposed to play Rapunzel in a panto right before the pandemic hit. So that's just funny you saying like someone else pick up the torch and try to make her more agency. And yeah, she's still here. We never got to hit the stage with her yet, but it was super cool having the lens of Rapunzel in this piece, and then like a Tangled, and then like the fairy tale of, and then her being in 2020 at the time, being like, who is Rapunzel today? So that's a little tangent, but yes. So in something that's fascinating to me, because I get like with this piece, like we kind of need to know how everyone is connected, right? Because they're all going into the woods. It's all like the same woods. Like to me, it's like Rapunzel. We find out very early on that Rapunzel is the baker's sister.
Yep. And
like that she was she was basically used as transaction, right? For the witch.
Yeah.
And that's all we ever, I would argue, like all we ever really see. Like she very much is like a plot device, because I think she was born into that. Like that's kind of what she became. So it's cool watching. She does have chunks of the piece where it is just focused on her, because we're almost watching like a failed narrative. Like she's trying her darndest to get an arc, but something always comes in her way. And she literally has the burden of like a whole head of hair that she's been like tugged and pulled which way, like you can, that has several meanings. And then we find it is like a failed narrative. And then if we were to talk about like, so that going back to, she's the sibling of the baker, and this is the baker's story, right? This is the story of the baker. So we see that sibling get that, but then so it's like success and failure. And it's like, but it's interesting. You don't really, unless you pick that up in the exposition that they're siblings, there isn't really anything in the story that brings them together by happenstance, or like bring like on the nose peppering the fact that they are siblings.
It's a forgotten element of the story. Like,
yeah, and so
it's
but
a
then
throwaway
I'm
line.
But
do they even have a scene together? I'm trying to even remember.
No,
like,
they do not.
Like the fact
And
that
then
they're
it's like-
siblings.
Sorry, her suicide scene, they're in the same space, but they never talk to
interact.
each other.
Yeah.
And it's like, and it's interesting. It's like I would love to know if that was done on purpose. Like if we are supposed to get this like success story and this failure story, and then I was always like thrown for a loop why like she had twins. Like
that's from the original fairy tale.
Right, but then I'm like
came.
in this lens, like it's interesting to me. I'm like here it is, like the baker's wife and the baker, like their whole purpose of this journey is because they cannot have a child, and they end up having a child, and yet like, and then she's dealt the life she's living, and she's given an abundance of children, arguably, and cannot provide for them. So there's again this like Venn diagram of like the baker and Rapunzel. Like I'm always drawn to trying to pave out Rapunzel with the baker or the baker with Rapunzel, because again, we are told that they are siblings. And I think the fact that we're told that, there's got to be a reason for that. I mean, it does add in that other, it loops things around, right? That brings in the witch, which is next door to the baker who meets this, like, but that would be a totally another conversation, or like an essay written of like Rapunzel and the baker and what does it mean?
A study in duality.
Sure, exactly.
Ooh.
So I do think she is a plot device, but she tries her darndest to create her own story, and it just doesn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, so that's why I've always wondered about Rapunzel. She's always been a fascinating character to me, which is why the fact that we have somebody like Mariana who's got all this treasure trove of knowledge with her mom, that I was like, oh, definitely need to talk to her mom at some point and see what happened behind, because like this show was rewritten heavily through out of town trials. Like Sondheim and Lapine really ratcheted and refined the story. Like the fact that there was supposed to be 3 little pigs. Apparently Rumpelstiltskin was supposed to show up at what point.
Too many characters.
Yeah, well, it's the thing of like, and I think that's what happens with Rapunzel is she is, and that's why I've always wondered, like, did Sondheim intend for there to be a song for Rapunzel in Act 2, where like, because she has that great monologue about like, you locked me in a tower with nobody, then you took away my prince and banished me to a desert where I had nobody. Oh, and then I bore twins. Like the fact that like it feels like you could put a song in there where she is really telling the witch off, but it's about like how, because she says one of the tragic lines is, because of the way you treated me, I can never be happy. Like, I think that's just setting up a song right there, and it just wasn't a song. So unfortunately, I think Rapunzel is, first of all, just unfortunately a victim of plot timing. Like, just, you got, as Ryan said, there's so many characters to get through. And if your main focus is the baker and his wife and his journey, and their journey, somebody's got to give somewhere along the way. And I think Rapunzel fell into that plot trap for Sondheim and Palmer. They're like, okay, we need a character with hair as yellow as gold. Also, there needs to be a witch in the story. So either it's going to be Sleeping Beauty or it's going to be Rapunzel, because those are the 2 kind of blonde famous princesses we got. Okay, we'll go with Rapunzel because you got something there with her, and she's got a prince, and like, even though like, so like, I think it was just kind of like, who do we have in the fairy tale canon that we can use? But mind you, that being said, this production tried to flesh her out more, bringing back the song Our Little World, some of her interactions with the witch, like the fact that after the witch fails to cast her spell, Rapunzel cackles and is like giddy at the fact that now she can get away from her mom because her mom's magic has been taken away. So she actually can't escape from there. And I mean, I do love the fact that Lapine and Sondheim did kill her off. I do think that is something that is really drives home the point of, we forget about happily ever after, and all the stuff that she has gone through would have some type of traumatic impact on her life. Like, and so the fact that she is somebody who chooses to not stay in the woods, she actively chooses to run in front of the giant. And
yeah, see, I would have preferred if she came to some kind of self-actualization instead of that, because like, what message does that send, that if you go through all this trauma, there's nothing left in life for you?
I think it's the honest portrayal of, some people are able to get through the woods and come forward with their trauma and move forward in life with that, and then some people can't. Unfortunately, there are some people in the world who face trauma and sadly can't move forward in the woods. Sometimes,
but we can use stories to sort of make a more healthy roadmap of how someone can get out of those woods despite everything.
But I think with that, that's what happens when Cinderella, Little Red, Jack, and the baker all decide to band together.
Yes,
I would maybe argue that they wouldn't have had been able to get out of the woods or get out of the situation by themselves, but they turned to each other and they knew as a unit that they could.
So I think I like that interpretation a lot, but my 2 thoughts about that is, one, couldn't Rapunzel have been part of that coalition, and maybe they could have helped her out too? And if not,
I think it's just too many characters.
It's too many characters.
It's also she wasn't written in the same scene as these characters.
Well, but
right?
again, she could have been like then this is just part of the dramaturgy of it all, and like to me, if she was set up as a clearer foil to those characters, and like through the doubling of like the duality with her and the baker, like if things had been done in the plotting of it to make it clear that this is set up as a contrast to this, but they almost feel like they're on two very separate trajectories that never quite speak to each other.
Well, yeah, and something that's even darker to think of, like if, you know, we've talked about like children will listen or children must listen, right? Because even that, to me, that is like a moral of the story, or it can be like a thesis statement for this piece. But like we talked about, the same melodies are used in this piece, but different lyrics. That same melody is troped throughout, but different like moods. Because you have like the children will listen, and then you have like the children must listen, right? There's the starkness, there's the shift. And it's interesting to think that the witch sings these songs, and Rapunzel is who these songs are about. Like, she's using Rapunzel as the case study.
Yeah. Well, the first time the song appears is after she dies.
It makes me want to go into a deeper dive of Rapunzel, because if she is the catalyst for one of the morals or thesis of this piece, and then we see her story so tragically unfold, again, I'm sort of thinking of the piece of like, it's Act 1, you could watch as just a magical fairy tale, and you could arguably leave after Act 1 and be fine. But then shit hits the fan in Act 2, and literally hue-wise, it gets darker. And it's like, that, to me, would be so interesting to like just divulge even more into that character, because, like, again, like that the children, she is the child in that situation. Like, right? We don't know if the witch had any other children that she's kind of using that as the catalyst for those songs. Anyways, we're getting more like philosophically into the brain of Rapunzel, but it would just be interesting to comb through more.
Yeah, I definitely think Sondheim and Lapine set up a very interesting character with, like, she is the baker's sister. There's the fact she does have twins in the desert. Like, there's a lot of great things there. I just think, once again, and I think if we talk to Sondheim, you probably go, this show is already 2.5 hours, almost 3. I can't give everybody their full, like, story. Sometimes some characters just need to be a plot device to get us to the next plot point while still giving them a little bit of something. But yeah, she's a fascinating character. She's someone who I've always walked away from this musical with going, you were overlooked as a character, because she doesn't get a big song like Cinderella, Jack, or Little Red do. She's someone who is always around other characters who sing big songs, but never does she get her own. And all of the time, her plot points are rushed through, where it's like, oh, and by the way, Rapunzel was walking through the desert. She had twins, and oh, she cried on her prince, and oh, look, his sight came back. Surprise, happy ending. Or the fact that, like, she has to react to the song "Stay With Me," and she doesn't actually get to say anything in that song. And then, like, in Act 2, it's like all of a sudden she's now in a downward spiral. And she's like, oh, well, because of this and this happened. And the next time we see her, she's running into the giant. So, yeah, definitely, I think there was plot points there. I'd be really interested to talk to Sondheim and her mom, Mariana, just to see what the process in the rehearsal room was like. Because I'd be very interested to see what happened with Rapunzel there. And if she was always just intended to be a plot device, or if they had bigger ambitions that just never, unfortunately, fully were able to come to fruition. So, interesting. Well, I mean, we have gone on a deep dive journey in the woods here. But before we all leave the woods for a time, let's all give our sign-offs. Jill, where can people find and follow you in your antics?
Yes, folks can find me on Instagram. My artist Instagram account is jillian.robinson96. I am, as I mentioned in a previous review I was in, I'm still a production manager and head of stage management for a digital restoration series. So we are going to be working on Venice Preserved as our next production for that, and that's going to start next week. So keep your eyes peeled for any Zoom performance or advertisement due to that or with that. And I'm still trying to keep up with doing some singing and all that jazz. So just visit my page if you'd like to learn about some upcoming theater or hear some tunes.
Yes. Mariana, where can people find and follow you?
So I'm actually taking a bit of a social media break at the moment. So holding off on sharing my social accounts. But I'm in my 3rd year of my graduate MFA program, 1 more year to go. So catch me May 2022 as a fully formed person.
Wonderful. Ryan, give us your classic Ryan Borochovitz send-off.
I'm not on. I don't know why this is so classic. I'm not active on social media, so don't bother trying to find me. You could just send all that love to Cup of Hemlock Theatre, which is, hey, that's where you're watching the show right now. Like, share, and subscribe, etc., etc. Sign up for a sonnet from the link in the description of this video. Hey, do you like sonnets? Shakespeare sonnets specifically? Sign up for one, film yourself recording it, and we'll share it on this here very YouTube channel where you're presumably watching this. Yeah.
Yep.
Bad plug.
Wasn't as witty as your last one, but we'll take it.
You're running out of steam for wit. Yeah.
Fair enough. So you can follow me at Mackenzie Horner on all social media platforms. If you didn't get enough Into the Woods chat, you can actually go over to my other podcast, Before the Downbeat, where our season 3 opening episode was all about Into the Woods, where we got all into the production history of the songs a little bit deeper. So you can do that. And you also can find all other great Sondheim episodes we've done, including Sweeney Todd, Merrily Roll On Company. Not sure if we'll have another one by the time this episode comes out. Probably not. So yeah, just go on and check all those great Sondheim episodes out. Just stay tuned. If you haven't subscribed to the Cup of Hemlock podcast, do that. You can now take us on the go, which is lots of fun. And other than that, everybody, we thank you so much for joining us on this journey of Into the Woods and Out of the Woods and Home Before Dark. So thank you all. Yes, I wish. Bye.
Cheers, everyone.